God's Eternal Purpose by Gary Sigler, Chapter 10. All we have to do in the slightest way in our weakest moment is begin to turn to the Spirit within and begin to fellowship and begin to speak to our Father and learn to appreciate the enjoyment that He brings to us. How do we become filled in spirit? Jesus said in John 6, verse 57, "As the living Father has sent me, and I live by the Father, so he that eats me, even he shall live by me." It's that simple, folks. We know in the natural we become what we eat. If we live on junk food, eventually our bodies will break down because of the way we eat. But Jesus said, if you really want to live, as the living Father has sent me, I live by the Father, so ye that eats me, even he shall live by me. We need to learn in our darkest hours how to eat Jesus. Now you all know the story. Some of the people left him because they thought he was talking about cannibalism, but he said, "Eat my flesh. If you want to live by the Spirit of God, you must eat my flesh." What is that? The Word became flesh. So if you want to live by God, you eat the Word. Not the Bible, but the words that God speaks to you. God has spoken many things to us in our lifetime, and we need to learn to eat and to feast on that which we know to be the truth. Now, Scripture can become the Word that you eat, but not by the dead letter. It has to be the living, vibrating, energizing, quickening Word as you read it. As you feast on that, you will become like Him. You will find the most awesome, the most magnificent love that you have for all of creation. You can look at any human, you can look in any circumstance, it makes no difference. You will find such an overwhelming love coming out of your innermost being that will change people around you. Living a spiritual life is not about works. It's about being a manifestation of God on this earth. I love what Stacy Wood shared with me a few years ago. He said, you can go down to the ocean and take a cup and scoop out of the water, and in that water is everything that the ocean is, all of the elements and the minerals and the salt. Everything of the ocean is in that cup, but that cup is not all of the ocean. Everything that God is, all of His wonderful attributes, the wonderful expression that He is, all the loveliness is in me, but I'm not all of God. I love what Paul told the Ephesians. This is the Amplified translation, but he said, "The church is the fullness of Him who fills everything, everywhere with Himself." You see, that is the true expression of the church, and that is why I say the church age isn't over. The religious age is over, but the church is beginning to stand up in all of her beauty and glory, a people being raised up in the consciousness of God. We have no condemning judgment. We refuse to look on one another according to the flesh. Today, we understand that all men are spiritual beings. All men have been lowered into this flesh realm and have lost their way, have lost their understanding of where they came from and who they are. So we hold aught against no man. We have no wrongful judgment against any man. John 4:13. Whosoever drinks of this water shall thirst again, but whosoever drinks of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. I used to read that and say, oh my God, I was always hungry and thirsty after God. I was never satisfied. I never found the reality that I was searching for. I would read scriptures like, I am come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. And I'd ask God, where is it? Because I thought the life abundant was in my performance, and because I wasn't performing as a good Christian, then I couldn't believe these things were so for me. I thought that for these things to be so, I had to correct my outward condition, and that is what keeps us in darkness. Out of our innermost being flows that living water. It's not on the outside of us. We have created our life today the way we are. God didn't do it. We have created our experience today. In the past, we've done that by default because we have not known the truth of our being. What I mean by that is we have unconsciously created our condition. I didn't consciously create a body of sickness and disease. We have been unconscious creators. We have believed the lies that we've been taught. We've believed all the divisive things that we've been taught. But now we are having an awakening to know we have the mind of Christ, and we're letting this mind function in us, and we are refusing to think about the negative thoughts. We are refusing to be anxious about where our next meal is coming from when our boss gives us the last paycheck. We're refusing to accept the circumstances that we may be in now because we know the truth. And because we know the truth and we understand that we are now operating out of the mind of Christ, we are becoming a conscious creator, which simply means that if you don't like circumstances, you have the power to change them. And we are just learning this understanding, and we're not going to change overnight, but we are changing. Death and life are in the power of our tongue. You may not believe it, and you don't believe it, or you wouldn't be speaking the way you do. I'm talking to myself when I say I. I'm not pointing fingers. But you see, we are learning to control our tongue. We are learning not to speak negative thoughts, but speak life, light, and love to ourselves and everyone else. We have had the Word of Faith movement for years trying to teach us the power of the tongue, and most of us just took it with a carnal understanding and started believing and confessing for cars and houses and material things. I understand the carnal mind, what it does with the truth. However, it does not make it any less true. We can become conscious creators rather than unconscious creators, because if we don't consciously begin to create, we will always create by default. What do I mean by that? Whenever you continually talk about what you don't want, you will create more of what you do not want. You may say, this doesn't sound like what Jesus taught, but he certainly did. Kenneth Hagin's famous verse to quote was Mark 11, verse 23. Whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he says come to pass, he shall have anything he says. For years I used to say I will never be able to quit this habit, or I will never be able to live the Christian life, and so I created a life that could not do what I wanted to do. What changed me is one day, as I was confessing my sins, as I did every day, and winning over my inability to live godly, I felt God say, Stop it. You believe the word in your heart, but you are always confessing the opposite. Start speaking what you believe in your heart instead of what your carnal mind is telling you. My life began to change when I started to talk and confess what I believed to be the truth. Death and life truly are in the power of your tongue. I began to reject those negative thoughts and those feelings of inadequacies. There was a time when in a church meeting that I was asked to stand and testify to the congregation. I left the church and never went back because there is no way I could stand before people and say anything. I was such an introvert and so scared and so frightened. So I know by experience you don't have to stay the way you are. Because of knowing the truth today of my true being, I can stand and speak before thousands with no feelings of inferiority. We just need to take the time to eat Him, to drink Him, to experience His inner life, and it begins to strengthen and energize us by the power of His Spirit. The only thing we need to do is to learn to live by Christ. It's the simplest thing you will ever do, and also the hardest. Why? Because we are dealing with the carnal mind. I mean, how could we ever think that we could be as Jesus on this earth? Your mind will never let you believe that. You have to experience it to believe it. But you can begin to reject those thoughts that tell you that you can't. And you can begin again to change the way you see yourself. One of the most life-changing experiences we will ever have is when we begin to have a grateful heart. You know, all of us are subject to look at our conditions. The more we think about our condition and the more we meditate about how it's not working, the worse it's going to get, because you are creating by your thinking and your speaking. Let's begin our day by being grateful and focusing on the positive things. A lot of people don't like this word at all because they say, well, this is New Age stuff. Well, maybe New Age people have some truth. Just maybe they do. I first began to speak publicly in 1982. And from the very first weekend that I began to speak, I began by teaching a series I called Living by the Life of God. It was my first message that I ever spoke and was sharing with folks how to live by His life in you. And from that very first series of tapes that I did, I was called a New Age teacher, because the religious mind will always classify something it doesn't understand as false teaching.